Okay, in chapter 14, we're going to be looking at fallacies of ambiguity. Now, this is another kind of fallacy that is based on unclear use of language. Unlike fallacies of vagueness, though, ambiguity is not unclarity due to a lack of precision. So being ambiguous doesn't mean that there's a gray area or a borderline case that we can't clearly identify. So the language is not unclear because it's not precise. Rather, ambiguous language is unclear because it has more than one meaning. In the same way that we said that much of the language that we use is vague, that is imprecise, being rich, fast, tall, thin, bald, a lot of the language that we use is also ambiguous. That is, many of the words that we use have more than one meaning. Although this is not always a problem because we can usually understand which meaning is intended. Sometimes because of the context, sometimes because of the other words in a sentence. But once in a while, we use language in a way that is ambiguous. That is, that we can't understand which of the two or more meanings are intended. There are two kinds of ambiguity that we'll be dealing with. Semantic ambiguity, which is the one we'll focus most on, as well as syntactic ambiguity. Semantic ambiguity has to do with the meaning of words themselves. So this occurs when the meaning of a word or phrase is unclear because it can be interpreted in at least two different ways. So for example, if I say, give me a hit, I might mean something like, hit the baseball, give me a base hit. I might mean something like, punch me in the arm, or come on, produce a really great song, or pass the joint, or connect me with someone who is a match. Right? Give me a hit on a match. And again, this is true of much of our language. It admits of more than one meaning. Though, as I said, usually the context allows us to understand. So, for example, if the baseball coach says, give me a hit, he probably means that he wants the batter to get a base hit. If someone who is a music producer says, give me a hit to one of his singers, then he probably means produce a great song, and so on and so forth. So oftentimes the context allows us to understand the meaning of words, but sometimes it doesn't. For example, a simple sentence like Mary had a little lamb may seem obvious and unambiguous, but actually it does have ambiguous language. There are two words that are ambiguous in this sentence. Had is ambiguous because had might mean owned, it might mean ate, it might mean gave birth to. So whether Mary owned a little lamb or ate a little lamb or birthed a little lamb is something that we want to disambiguate to understand the meaning of. Also, lamb is ambiguous here. Lamb might mean pet, or it might mean dinner. This sentence might mean Mary ate a little lamb chop for dinner. It might mean that Mary owned a little pet lamb, or it might mean that Mary is a lamb and she gave birth to a little baby lamb. In addition to semantic ambiguity, there's also syntactic ambiguity. So when the grammar of a sentence is unclear because it can be interpreted in at least two different ways. So in the same way that the words themselves can be unclear due to ambiguity, the grammar of a sentence can also allow for unclarity. Free whales, for example, might mean I'm giving whales away, or I want political action to free the whales in captivity. If we were to disambiguate, if we said free the whales, it should be clear that what we mean is the latter, that we want political action to free the whales in captivity. There's just one fallacy that we're looking at in chapter 14 with respect to ambiguity, and that's the fallacy of equivocation. This fallacy occurs when we use the same word or phrase to mean two different things inside one argument. So, for example, if I gave you this argument, 6 is an odd number of buttons to have on a calculator. You might agree that premise 1 is true. And then I say odd numbers cannot be divided by 2. You might agree that premise 2 is true. And then I conclude, based on 1 and 2, that 6 cannot be divided by 2. If we were not to identify the ambiguity in the word odd, it may appear that the conclusion follows from these two premises. However, it should be obvious, I think, in this example that 6 in fact can be divided by 2. So the conclusion is not true because we have relied upon ambiguous language. So this argument commits the fallacy of equivocation. In the first premise, odd is used to mean strange, but then in the second premise, odd is used to mean uneven. So the conclusion is false because it depends on the equivocation of the meaning of odd. We've used odd to mean two different things, and then we've drawn a conclusion based on the equivocation, the going back and forth between the meaning of odd. So what do we do when we encounter ambiguous language in an argument? What we want to do in order to be charitable is to try to identify whether or not the author of the argument has been ambiguous. So we want to try to disambiguate any of the ambiguous terms in order to clarify the ambiguity in the argument. There are two ways to disambiguate language. One way is to rewrite the entire sentence itself, starting from scratch, to try to explain what that sentence might mean. And another way is to leave the sentence entirely intact and then expand on the sentence, adding context. So, for example, here's a sentence that admits of ambiguity. I don't know what state Johnny is in. So state is ambiguous language here. I can think of at least two meanings. So we might disambiguate this, clarify the sentence, in both of these ways by rewriting the sentence to reveal the two different meanings, and then also by expanding the sentence to reveal those same two different meanings. So in rewriting the sentence, we change the sentence. So we might rewrite the sentence in this way. I don't know what U.S. state Johnny lives in. So we don't leave the sentence intact. We rewrite it to clarify that what we mean is one of the states in the U.S. The second meaning might be, I don't know what state of mind Johnny is in. Again, we don't leave the sentence, I don't know what state Johnny is in, intact. We rewrite it to reveal that we're talking about Johnny's state of mind rather than a U.S. state. That's one way to disambiguate. A second way is to expand on the sentence. In expanding, we leave the sentence entirely intact, just like it is. I don't know what state Johnny is in. And then we expand on it by adding context. So to get the first meaning, where state means U.S. state, we might write, I don't know what state Johnny is in. Could be Vermont, could be California. And so the second way we might expand the sentence to show that we're talking about Johnny's state of mind would be again to leave the sentence intact. I don't know what state Johnny is in, but he's screaming at someone. So adding context allows us to expand the original sentence, leaving the original sentence completely intact as it was, just adding something to the end to disambiguate, to differentiate between the two meanings that are suggested here, whereas rewriting allows us to rewrite the sentence. We don't leave the sentence entirely intact, we just state it in a different way that clarifies the meaning.